The left brain deals with logic, details, facts, patterns, practicality, science, and math, as the right brain deals with feeling, intuition, symbols, images, risk-taking, philosophy, and religion. With a deliberate push for government-controlled educational curriculums, generation after generation of the youth are being taught to focus only on the facts, figures, and numbers. Repetition is used to train children subconsciously to accept what they're learning. Children aren't rewarded for questioning the validity of the information they receive. They are ridiculed. However, the children who blindly accept the information as true and merely regurgitate the information on command when it is time to take a test, those children go on to become the decision makers in our government, law, medicine, business, and every other occupation with power and prestige. The most detrimental effect of being pushed away from holistic thinking with the full brain into a strictly left brain thought is what is known as the suppression of the feminine. Every male and female have both feminine and masculine qualities.
Dr. Ron Prinz at the University of Florida in 1980 was the first to study behavioral effects systematically in children to see what it would do to children. And he found that children were eating about 40% of their calories as sugar. And when he looked at the highest sugar consumers, the top 25% of these children, found that they had poor measures on attentiveness. That is, they were very hyperactive. These are the kids that are bouncing off the wall that we go and put on Ritalin. Dr. Jane Goldman, University of Connecticut, 1986, she looked at something interesting. She gave the amount of sugar that's equal to what's found in a Coke and found that mental performance by 30 minutes had significantly declined. It had maximized at an hour, and that the people drinking the Coke made twice as many mistakes in a test than those who were not drinking Coke. So sugar consumption also has a lot to do with how well you can think. And the harmful effects usually subsided about an hour and a half after they had consumed the drink. Now, Judith Wortman, and her husband is a neuroscientist, works mainly with nutrition of the brain at MIT, found there's a strong correlation between sugar intake, behavior, brain, and serotonin function. Well, all these drugs, what we call SSRI drugs, they're the drugs that regulate and make your brain serotonin level go up. Well, unfortunately, in some people, they'll make the serotonin level go down, and these people will commit suicide or they'll commit murder. And these are when they looked at all these kids killing people at different schools around the country, like Columbine, all of them were taking these SSR medications, every one of them. So you were making child killers by lowering the serotonin inadvertently, thinking you were going to raise it. Well, we know that serotonin levels is correlated with carbohydrate levels. And you can create killer mice, like I was talking about, just by lowering brain serotonin levels. And again, looking at the Qualla Indians in the Andes of Peru, they found that the very aggressive ones, and these are people committing rapes and murders, it was a very violent village. 55% of them were hypoglycemic, and almost always the one that was doing the killing and the raping and the murdering and such were the ones that were most hypoglycemic. Their main diet was potatoes. Well, potatoes is a very powerful hypoglycemic. And how many of you sit around eating potato chips? Potato chips are powerfully hypoglycemic. It's like eating sugar. This may be why the Irish are so mean sometimes. And when they looked at the docile males that lived in this same village, they had normal blood sugars. Egger and Carter, this is a famous study in 1985, looked at 76 hyperactive children and placed them on the low-carbohydrate diet, which also eliminated many of the food dyes. And when they did, they found that 82% of the children improved on this new diet, and 28% actually returned completely to normal. These were children that were very hard to control. The highest reaction in terms of the dyes was yellow dye number 5, which is tartrazine, and sodium benzoate, which are very common food additives. The most commonly reactive foods were soybeans, and we're in a soy craze in this country. You got to have soy milk, soy this, soy that, and they think it prevents all these diseases, and it doesn't. Cow's milk, 64%, and chocolate, 59%. So the most reactive food was the soybean, which in this country we're feeding the baby soybean, we're feeding the mother's soybean, everybody is consuming soy products. This was an interesting study. They looked at college males. And before they enrolled them in the study, they checked them, make sure they didn't have any pre-existing psychiatric history, no drug use, and no medical conditions that might affect the outcome of the study. And what they did is they gave them a questionnaire, and you could answer it in certain ways that would be aggressive or other ways that would be more passive. And they found, almost without exception, there was a strong relationship between aggressive type answers and their existence of hypoglycemia. And as we said, serotonin regulates the brain's ability to resist aggressive acts. It's a more calming neurotransmitter, and it's the transmitter most connected with depression and suicide. When it's low, you have high suicide rates. When it's low, you have high depression. When it's low, you have high aggression. Corn is very low in the precursor amino acid that is turned into serotonin in your brain. It's called tryptophan. It's very low in corn flakes, cornstarch, corn flour, all these corn products. And so if you're eating a high diet in corn products, your ability of your brain to make this serotonin is significantly reduced. You're more likely to suffer from depression, suicidal tendencies. Tyrosine is the precursor amino acid for neurotransmitter epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine in the brain. Dopamine has to do with motivation. Epinephrine, norepinephrine has to do with attention, so that you can pay attention and concentrate on things. We find that low levels of tyrosine are associated with depression and sensitivity to stress. When you increase tyrosine consumption, it reduces stress. So we've seen multiple large studies, well-controlled studies, that the amount of sugar in your diet has direct activity in terms of your criminal behavior, your propensity to violent acts, and to antisocial behavior. And we're consuming more than ever. 57% of this sugar comes from processed foods. It's not putting a spoon of sugar in your coffee. It's hidden in your foods, particularly processed foods. The leading source of all sugar in the American diet is fruit juices and sodas. 43% of all the sugar is coming from those two sources. And if you go anywhere, there's young people, they're drinking sodas. But you think, from what people say, it's mostly young people. Because if you look at the ads from Coca-Cola and Pepsi, they're all targeted at the young. And what do mothers do when their babies get old enough to start giving them some table food and juice? They give them apple juice, which is about one of those little cardboard containers. It's 35 grams of sugar. Orange juice, all the berry juices are extremely high in sugar. So you start your child out early in life getting used to this high sugar intake. Now, since 1974, the consumption of sodas has doubled. So we're drinking more soft drinks than ever before. Teenagers are drinking an equivalent of 54 teaspoons of sugar a day, just from the sodas. The nutritionists say that your limit should be 10 teaspoons a day. So they're consuming about 5 times more than that. And of course, some are 10 times that. You have these great big drinks that you get at McDonald's, and they think nothing of drinking them. That's the thing to do. If you're thirsty, you drink something that has sugar in it. Study from UNC at Chapel Hill, they looked at adults aged 49 to 50 and found that they increased their intake of soft drink consumption 250%. So it's not just the young people. And ironically, when they looked at those over age 60, they had increased it 300%. Well, metabolically, we know when you consume a lot of sugar, what it does is it dramatically increases the free radical generation in your brain. And it produces cross-linking of the proteins in all of your cells that dramatically increases the damaging effect of these free radicals. The bottom line is it makes every cell in your body age much, much faster, particularly brain cells. People who consume a lot of calories, particularly in sugar, their incidence of Alzheimer's disease is about 6 times higher than everybody else's. So your caloric intake, particularly in sugar, has more to do with Alzheimer's disease than a lot of things that people think are related. It's estimated that 50% of the population in the United States has reactive hypoglycemia. What this means is if you eat something with sugar or drink something with sugar, your blood sugar will fall dramatically because of an oversecretion of insulin. It gets so low, you start getting these symptoms of being very anxious, angry, trembly, weak, where you feel like you just have to hurry up and eat something with sugar in it, or you're going to pass out. And some people do pass out and have seizures, and some people die from reactive hypoglycemia. And again, it goes back to sugar, stimulates insulin release, which causes hypoglycemia, which stimulates the adrenal glands to secrete cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, makes the brain secrete glutamate, the excitotoxin, and all of this results in hyperactive behavior. But it also results in permanent brain damage. Now, numerous studies have shown there's a close correlation between alcohol abuse, hypoglycemia, and criminal behavior. If you look at the most violent felons in prison, people think are related. It's estimated that 50% of the population in the United States has reactive hypoglycemia. What this means is if you eat something with sugar or drink something with sugar, your blood sugar will fall dramatically because of an oversecretion of insulin. It gets so low, you start getting these symptoms of being very anxious, angry, trembly, weak, where you feel like you just have to hurry up and eat something with sugar in it, or you're going to pass out. And some people do pass out and have seizures, and some people die from reactive hypoglycemia. And again, it goes back to sugar, stimulates insulin release, which causes hypoglycemia, which stimulates the adrenal glands to secrete cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, makes the brain secrete glutamate, the excitotoxin, and all of this results in hyperactive behavior. But it also results in permanent brain damage. Now, numerous studies have shown there's a close correlation between alcohol abuse, hypoglycemia, and criminal behavior. If you look at the most violent felons in prison, most of them are hypoglycemic, most of them are alcohol abusers. And we know that those violent felons, when they drink alcohol, their blood sugar falls tremendously. They're getting a hyper-reactive effect from the alcohol. And I remember a young man in my practice one time came in and he had lost all the vision in half of his visual field. He couldn't see anything on one side. And what happened is he was drinking, his blood sugar fell, it fell so low he went into a coma, and he had a stroke on one side of his brain in the visual portion of his brain. And that happens. And young people don't know that can happen, but it's not that uncommon. You can have seizures and you can die during these spells. An interesting correlation between alcoholism and hypoglycemia. In the study, they found 97% of alcoholics were hypoglycemic, compared to 18% for the controls. And the reason the alcoholic continues to drink alcohol is because the alcohol is a source of tremendous energy. And so when their blood sugar falls, they drink the alcohol, they feel better, and their blood sugar falls again, they drink more alcohol, and it's just an unending cycle. Now, this is what happens when you treat the hypoglycemia. They found that if they treated the hypoglycemia, 71% of alcoholics became sober. Alcoholics Anonymous' best rate is only 25%. So correcting one condition corrected another condition. And if you look at the FBI statistics, most of the violent crimes in the United States are connected to alcohol. Most of your auto accidents are connected to alcohol. Most of your road rage are connected to alcohol because it's producing the same effect that the sugar is producing. Now, the most aggressive effects of this is in people who have abnormalities of the temporal lobe of the brain. The temporal lobe is not just for memory, but it's the elaboration center for your emotions, particularly things like anger. Connects to the amygdala, a nucleus in the brain that has to do with anger. And we find that if people with temporal lobe dysfunction become hypoglycemic, they become enraged. These are the people who have road rage. These are the people who, in a moment of anger, stomp somebody to death, or picks up a knife and stabs somebody to death, just out of the blue, for things that are so minor, most of us would just shrug it off, but they don't. Because it triggers their temporal lobe, their anger centers in their temporal lobe, and they lose all control. We call it the discontrol syndrome. And working in emergency rooms for many, many years, I can tell you, all the alcoholics I saw come in, some of the most violent people were the alcoholics. And it would take everybody in the emergency room to hold them down. They had tremendous strength, and they were like enraged animals. And that's why you see these things, a road rage, that when you hear about it, you think, how could someone do that? Well, it's not a conscious act of them doing it. It's the fact that you have lowered their blood sugar or had an effect of one of these nutrients on their brain function that drives them like wild animals. If I put an electrode in your brain and I stimulate that same center, you will attack whoever's closest to you and you'll try to kill them, and you can't stop it. So this is the fact that nutrition can have. They looked at a group of Indians in Peru, found that 55% were hypoglycemic. It is the most violent people on earth, this one tribe. And they found it's because they're hypoglycemic. I'll cover that a little bit more later. Now, sugar's not the only thing that can make you hypoglycemic. Aspartame, NutraSweet, and monosodium glutamate are both powerful stimulators of insulin release. They will both make you powerfully hypoglycemic.